Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Freedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy from Keshet Podcasts, 2 Jews on the news.
Except this week it is 3 Jews on the news. Count them.
Even
because
better
we
than
are
2
joined.
Jews.
Even better. We are joined all the way from the United States by Jeffrey Goldberg, Jeff Goldberg, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic. Welcome to Unholy, Jeff.
Welcome to, is my name Unholy, Jeff?
We are the unholy Jewish Trinity is what he meant to say.
I think Levi-Goldberg-Freedland, if we don't make it in the podcast business, we have got a future in tailoring, accountancy. Think of the possibility.
Yeah. Gastroenterology. Yeah. It's very diverse. It's a very diverse group of Jews.
If we were still living in a normal world, Jeff, we would actually be just sitting, all of us, in the same place, somewhere in a cool place in Washington or Tel Aviv or London.
Yeah.
Gossiping about the world, complaining about politics, having a competition about whose political system is more problematic.
Right. And who's a better Jew?
And who's a better Jew?
Well, don't forget the important
Is there
question.
A question? One of
Yes,
us lives
there
in
is.
Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
Are we asking the question who the better Jew is?
You've played that card far too early on. You've played that
No,
far
I've
too
got
early.
nothing left. That's it. I don't have
think
anything. I'm in Tel Aviv. I got vaccinations. That's what I have. What do you guys
Even
have?
without the restaurant setting, I think we can still gossip about politics, although I do feel slightly the third wheel here because the big dynamic has been between your 2 cities this week with the whole psychodrama of who's going to call when, and Bibi sitting there by the phone feeling neglected and abandoned, and finally the call came through.
Yeah, I have to, before everything, I want you guys to listen to how our version of SNL, Eretz Nehederet, our satire program, made fun of this yesterday. Basically, Bibi trying to call Biden not answering the phone until Bibi picks up the host's phone. His name is Kitzis, and trying to call Biden. Let's listen in. Even someone who doesn't know Hebrew can understand this.
Kitzis! How's it going, my good old friend?
Joe, זה אני, ביבי.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's no Joe here that's interested in speaking to you.
ג'ו, אני מצטער, לא הייתי ליד הטלפון. אתה חיפשת אותי?
No. I had to make some urgent calls to Russia, Mexico,
Yes.
Micronesia, Netherlands, Narnia, and Neverland.
I got to ask you, Jeff.
Yeah.
The message obviously has been sent, and the message is either we're too busy dealing with other countries or we're not, it's not urgent for us to deal with you.
No, it's you. It's
Netanyahu.
not.
Which
What would
one
be
is
the
it?
line? It's not about you, Israel. It's about you, Bibi. I mean, that's I think abundantly clear to anybody who's paid attention to the last, I was going to say 5 years of the Trump Bibi relationship, but actually the scars are old. I mean, you're talking about Barack Obama's vice president here, so even if the relationship with Trump and Bibi hadn't been so amorous, you'd still have long memories. And remember, the Biden team is to a large degree the Obama team, and they lived through years of the Bibi, Ron Dermer, screw with them kind of dynamic. And so, I'm surprised that Biden called it all.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you about that because but Bibi gets to brag that he's the first leader in the Middle East to get a call. Yes, 12th overall, but he places first in the Middle East. And I think I'm interested with what you say about the Obama people because here in London, when they were getting worried that Boris Johnson wouldn't get forgiven for having said, dissed Obama and talking about his part Kenyan ancestry and that's why he's hostile to Britain and all that. They were all saying, oh, no, the Biden people are above that. They don't harbor grudges. They'll move on. It's a new day. But I'm kind of with you. I think probably people's memories are long. And what you've just said there suggests, they still harbored a bit of a grudge and were operating on that basis by making Bibi wait.
Yeah, well, and it's also another thing. I mean, yes, do not underestimate the loathing. I mean, put it this way: if there was Prime Minister Lapid, it would have been 48 hours. Biden loves Israel. Biden loves the fact that he hasn't a long-standing relationship with Israel. They just really don't like Bibi. The second more substantive point, or sort of policy-oriented point, is that they don't. Well, I'm going to put it this way: they might think that the Israel-Palestinian dispute is important, but they don't want to pay any attention to it or invest any effort in it. So it's also not. Bibi is also the prime minister of a country that is not at the forefront of any kind of Biden policy agenda. Like, they are not going to repeat the mistakes of the tail end of the Obama administration and spend a lot of time and have a Secretary of State trying desperately to make a deal when the parties don't want to make a deal. So there's literally no reason for him to call Bibi, except by calling Bibi, he gets people to stop talking about whether or not he's going to call Bibi.
But there still is the issue of Iran. I mean, obviously, they're geared up to return to the JCPOA or some format of the JCPOA. That has to involve Israel. That has to involve talking with Israeli officials, even if you don't want to speak to Netanyahu himself.
Well, yes and no. I
mean, maybe
the
not.
The Obama administration didn't talk to Israel that much, maybe not enough during that process. But I don't doubt that there'll be more consultation. And I think, this is what the Obama administration did when it was fed up with Bibi. It underscored that our relationship with the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv is fantastic. Our relationship with X is fantastic, and just sort of do the workaround around the prime minister. No, but you're right. I mean, if Iran comes on the radar, then it's important. And the only other point I would make is that these are very experienced foreign policy hands, starting with the president himself, President Biden, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, and so on. They know that, you can ignore the Middle East, but the Middle East won't ignore you. And so that at some point in the next 4 years, there will be a Hezbollah crisis, an Iran crisis, a something crisis that will cause Biden to have to jump in. What they're hoping for, obviously, by that time is that there's a different prime minister in Israel.
I don't want to sound too Israeli about this, but when you say they don't like Netanyahu, to put it mildly, it's not that they don't like Israel. I mean, we should probably stress that point that.
Yeah,
Biden
but they don't like the right side. I mean, I
to,
shouldn't just personalize it
right.
too much. They don't like settlements. They don't like. They're not different than the majority of American Jews, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
In that sense, they don't like Likud-oriented policies. But I mean, Joe Biden is a person who, I'm sure Israelis know this. Spends. Can't help but tell the story of the time he met Golda and the story of this and the story of that. And, we've seen him wearing, kippot, Israeli kippot. I mean, he's from the generation of Democratic politicians that has an emotional relationship with the state of Israel, with the idea of Israel. They're just disturbed by the direction of politics. In one sense, it is not at all an abnormal situation. They're a liberal administration. The Netanyahu administration is a conservative administration. The Boris Johnson example is an interesting one. So they're just not going to get along that well because they don't agree in worldview anyway.
This is the Sex and the City rule, which is he's just not that into you.
We're focusing on Israel, obviously, but I do want to sort of zoom out on this. And, it has been 30 days, almost to the day, into the Biden presidency. And I wonder, when you look at these 4 years, you wrote a piece called more than a year ago, A Nation Coming Apart. And you wrote, Jeff, maybe it is that we as a people no longer seem to know who we are or what our common purpose is. And I wonder if it's hard to compare a month to 4 years, obviously, but has something been ameliorated in this month? Do you feel does DC feel different to you?
No, I mean, yes, it feels marginally different. I think the entire political world feels differently because Donald Trump isn't on Twitter. I mean, seriously,
Really?
That's a huge psychological, huge downward psychological pressure released. We're released from that because you don't have to think about him all the time. No, I mean, I think we're in a spring right now. I think we're in a temporary period. A temporary period of some calm, but there is no permanent Democratic majority. And I think the thing we've learned over the last month, going back to January 6th, is that the Republican Party, put aside Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse and a few other senators, the Republican Party has made its decision. Like they're pro January 6th insurrection. I mean, there are people who are leaving the Republican Party because of it. I don't think they represent more than 35 or 40% of the American public, but 35 to 40% of the American public, you know what? I mean, in a parliamentary system, obviously, 40% of the public is your prime minister, and so this movement is going to come roaring back. I don't have any doubt about it. I mean, let's put it this way: I have a little doubt. I mean, maybe things break apart, and the Republican Party reconstitutes itself, and it splits into two. But right now, there aren't two Republican parties. There's just one Republican Party, and some senators who are outliers from their party. So like we're just in a pause in the grand experiment of whether America can actually transition itself to being a multicultural democracy.
You see, that big thought has been on my mind a bit, partly because of something. Well, in fact, we've actually got a bit of you saying this to Yonit, which we should.
Me too.
Which we should hear, because I think you were on. Well, Yonit, you say when you spoke to Jeff, I think it was straight after January the 6th.
Right, it was the day after the riots, and you spoke on Channel 12, and you said this, and this was very interesting. Let's listen to it.
We are in a new kind of reality for America. I mean, you and I have joked about this over the years that Americans look at Israeli politics and have traditionally said, "Wow, it's crazy over there." But I think both on political stability and on vaccination, by the way, I think you're now in a position to lecture us about our stability and competence.
You see, I think you were partly being funny there, but you weren't, but not wholly. And the reason why
I was trying to be partly funny.
You were being, but partly, and you were, and you were being nice to Yonit because you were talking to Israel.
You better be nice to Yonit.
But the other, but
doesn't know my violent side yet.
The thing I'm remembering, Jeff, is, not that I in any way took this personally, but you made a bit of a splash a few years back when you wrote a cover story for The Atlantic saying, "Is it time for the Jews to leave Europe? Has that time come?" And, I think you and I had a conversation as you were writing that piece. And at the time, there was a kind of implied assumption that was pretty unarguable, which was that, there were populists and nationalists and xenophobes who were on the rise in Europe. And America was a kind of bedrock stability. And Jews tend to live more comfortably in places that are politically stable. And I'm not in any way going to say, is it time for the Jews of America to leave? But I do wonder if the premise of that thesis, which is America is rock solid and steady and that's good for Jews, is that premise just a bit more shaky now than it was when you wrote that landmark piece?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for not accusing me of being smugly superior in that writing, by the way.
Not one bit.
No, I mean, look, I continue to think that about Europe, about continental Europe in particular. Although, subsequent to those conversations we were having, you did see this rise of Corbynism. So, it wasn't all picnic in London for a long time. After the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre, I think a lot of us, we're sad and angry for all the usual reasons that one would be sad and angry, but it did shake the foundations it did shake the foundation to some large degree of complacency, I guess. It is interesting. I'll go back to this thing that Yonit and I were talking about on channel whatever it is. I never get the channels. No, I never get. I can never remember.
Let me make it. I'll give it a brief. It was channel 2. Netanyahu thought it was too strong a channel. He broke it up into 2 channels, 13 and 12. Now it's channel 12. See, I made that very simple for you.
By the way, when you say that, I begin to doubt my analysis that Israel is a stable, normal country.
I don't know why you said it in the first place. Maybe you were tired. I didn't want to argue.
When the prime minister can just say, "You are not Channel 2 anymore," it's like kind of bonkers sounding.
Yes.
But the thing that we were talking about when we talked right after January 6th, there's something to that. I think vis-a-vis American Jews, I think you can look and say, okay, we thought these things were in our past and they seem to be in our present. The vaccination plan, I come back to that. What Israel's doing is very impressive, and what we're doing here is only intermittently impressive. I guess to answer Mr. Freedland's question, I don't know if the picture in Europe has shifted. I mean, one of the things that happened in Europe subsequent to that peace is that, first they came for the Jews and then it was everybody. So that's sort of typical in the historical narrative, right? But I would say I don't know if the picture in Europe has changed much from that analysis, but definitely in America, there's a cloud over the status of the Jewish community in this country that wasn't quite so observable 5 or 6 years ago. Israel remains the same. I mean, actually, and what's interesting, if you sort of put this on a longer continuum, the difference between European Jewish communities, American Jewish communities, and Israeli Jewish community is that the Israeli Jewish community just gets bigger, and the other ones don't. So, while these weird instabilities are happening in diaspora countries, Israel just keeps clicking along. I mean, dysfunctionally in your usual delightful ways, but it just keeps clicking along and being a bigger economy and having a bigger population, and it kind of there begins to be a feeling. You begin to feel this idea that Israeli dominance in the global Jewish community becomes more and more obvious.
See, I was going to say that I think the dynamic in the diaspora that has changed in the way you said is that Israel, yes, numerically has got bigger, but the dynamic before was that there was this assumption that, America, if you were going to be anywhere else in the diaspora, America's the obvious place. There was that assumption that it was, still the Golden Medina and a kind of warm, accepting place. And therefore, the other issues were about other places in diaspora rather than diaspora itself. In terms of Europe, though, now, I think, the Viktor Orbáns of this world are still there. Le Pen could well give Macron a real close run in the next French election. The British example cuts both ways, because you're right. The Corbyn experience was simultaneously a traumatic experience for British Jews, and yet also oddly empowering in the sense that British Jews finally found their voice. They were no longer saddled with the kind of quietism of old, and they found their voice, they organised, and Corbyn was soundly defeated in the 2019 election, and the anti-Semitism was one of the issues, and therefore British Jews can comfort themselves that their fellow citizens did in the end repudiate that, and Labour has gone in a different direction. America does seem different because 75 million people voted for Donald Trump. He didn't get a thorough hiding the way Corbyn did, and picking up the thing you said, the American Republican Party have voted to stick with Trumpism in a way that the British Labour Party has more or less, besides a fringe, decided to turn a corner away from Corbynism. So, I'm not saying anyone has peace of mind here particularly. I think there's still worry that just the change in the dynamic is there's no longer that feeling that, oh, look, there's one big diaspora community where everything's fine. I don't think people think that anymore about anywhere in the diaspora, and I think that's a function of Trump and the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's the function of it's the function of the global rise of populism, and I think if you look at the French Jewish community, which is obviously the biggest in Europe, and I did some reporting on this, and I found it fascinating that as long as the National Front type of person was obsessing about Islam, they weren't obsessing about Judaism. Right, but it's like there's some joke about like you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the other guy who's running from the bear, and it's like I wouldn't look at any Jewish community in Europe and say, okay, you're fine. It's not like the European Jewish communities are sometimes less hated by the populist right only because they're not Muslim, right? And so yeah, I mean, I agree with you generally. It's because of populism, because of globalization, because of social media, because of a lot of different things, economic and technological dislocation. When there's disruption, cultural, civilizational disruption, when there's high levels of anxiety, when there's high levels of populism, Jews don't do well. Jews
when there's
do well.
a pandemic and a global,
Jews do well in centrism. Jews do well in kind of liberal, centrist, democratic environments.
Well, and steadiness, just when there's political stability, I think. I think your point about Jews and Muslims is absolutely right, and that's why I like it when Jews and Muslims do make common cause. And there are moments where that happens in Britain and in Europe. Israel complicates that picture, but I think a lot of communities outside do get that if they're going for one, they'll pretty soon be going for the other.
Right. The people who hate Muslims generally don't like Jews.
Right.
They just
even if they say
they might hate Muslims a little more than they hate Jews at the moment, but these are febrile issues.
You mentioned, Jonathan, Israel, and I remember this conversation that you had in 2014. You were sitting with Mehdi Hassan, and you said, the British Jewish community is exceptionally aligned and bound up with Israel, but they're not accountable or responsible for anything that the Israeli government is doing. And you gave the example of someone who, I think, wrote "Free Gaza" on a synagogue wall. And I remember listening to that and kind of thinking to myself, Israelis, it's not that we don't keep that in the center of our thinking. It's not that we don't care. We care very much about anti-Semitism. We care about it when it happens in the U.S. We care about it when it happens in Europe. But we don't always see the connection between what Israel does and what the ripple effect is. I guess my question to both of you would be, what don't we get? That's a very un-Israeli question, but still.
I think on that, the one thing I would say is the thing you've already fessed up to, Yonit, which is I don't think Israelis, and particularly so you're not responsible for this, but Israeli policymakers don't think for a second, and of course I don't expect them to think for more than 10 seconds, but they don't think for a second of what the impact will be outside Israel. The people who will have to carry the can or somehow explain this or be held accountable for it. It never enters their mind. So sometimes, there'll just be a form of words used by an Israeli politician or minister, and you just, you'll put your head in your hands thinking that is going to be so misunderstood outside or even understood. It's so inept. It may play brilliantly on, on Israeli TV, but that is just going to be a nightmare for Jews around the world. Why on earth would you say that? And then, of course, you realize they're not thinking for a second about that wider Jewish public. And so therefore, saying something that, Trump might love it, but everybody else around the world will, recoil from some kind of, ultra-nationalist or ethno-nationalist sentiment. That kind of thing would be an example. But, I've sort of almost got past the point of even thinking of expecting any different.
That's very Jewish of you, Jonathan.
That's a sort of podcast version of a shrug.
I'm just going to sit here. I'm not even going to expect anything different. It's an amazing coincidence. Maybe I'm throwing this conversation in a different direction, and forgive me, and we can pull it back. But I'm listening to you both, and it's coincidence. I was reading. I'm reading Jonathan's one of the 11 books that Jonathan has written called Jacob's Gift. It's about his family history and questions about Judaism. I hope I'm accurately describing it, Jonathan. And you talk about there's a moment where he talks about how Jews can sort of freeze their existence or their, set of values and put them in a knapsack and take it with them. And you, Jeff, in that piece that Jonathan was talking about, you asked one of your interviewees, do you have a bag? And it's so sort of inherent in the Jewish experience, right? That image of I'm taking everything I have with me, whether it's physical or it's spiritual, everything in a bag and I can take it with me. And the only thing I could think of while sort of coincidentally reading those two sentences this week was Israelis don't have that. I mean, it's not that they don't feel like it's a safe place. They have their, obviously they feel like they're under existential threat, but they don't have the feeling of putting everything in a bag. I mean, Israelis.
You mean they don't
think of how to buy more real estate, right?
You mean they don't have the comfort of doing that, or they don't even have the psychology of wanting to do that?
That's comfort?
Yeah, it's comfort. What, from a diasporic perspective? I mean, comfort in the sense of if you think that you might have to run from someplace, believing that there's someplace, believing that you're ready, or believing. I mean, I'm not saying this for myself or anybody in America. Really, I don't want to over dramatize how people feel. Right. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of a practical comfort if you actually thought you could go somewhere. But what I'm asking you is, like, Israelis don't even think that way, because why would you run from your country?
Right. I mean, we don't have that ingrained in us. I guess when you take it 3 steps further down the line, you say, okay, that's comforting, I can actually run away. But we don't think that in that sense. I think that is a different kind of
I think that's why Israel represents such a radical break from the Jewish experience, because, you know, every other Jewish community in history until this one has always thought that in some version. I mean, the point I was making before about the America thing the last 5 years is, I suspect if I was American, if I was sitting in Jeff's shoes for the very first time in my adult lifetime, I'd have had an inkling of that feeling about the bag in the last 5 years. If I were where you are, I would have done. Yeah. And in Britain, intermittently, I've had that, just an awareness of it vaguely. And I just think it's such a radical departure of 2 millennia of Jewish experience that you and your kids, Yonit, would never need to have that inkling even.
Right. That makes sense.
And I'm wondering if, you know, whether the end of Trump signals that the Proud Boys will now not be so proud, or they'll be proud in their basement.
Oh, no.
Rather, the social media has sort of taken that genie out of the bottle anyway, and it's going to take a while to fix. If it is fixed at all.
You'd have to be a pretty naive Jew. And like we do specialize in naive Jews, obviously. But but you'd have to be a pretty naive Jew to think that, oh, that was weird, but it's all over. I mean, the conditions that led to Trump's rise remain. And the issue is, you know, what happens when a more clever populist or somebody more industrious or not quite as stupid or whatever, you know, however you want to frame who the next populist is. If the conditions pertain, then the conditions pertain. By the way, I didn't know that your podcast was going to be so serious. I would have done homework.
There's a moment where we talk about ferrets. That Jonathan has a thing.
I thought we were just going to make fun of each other.
It's true. We've gone kind of dark.
It was me with the bag.
Wait. Are you saying this is a Jewish podcast?
I should not be reading any of what you guys have written ever. That is my problem. My mistake, my bad. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'll just leave you two alone to talk about
I think
the English
lighten
language.
it a little bit by asking Jeff to play our little game with us, which we always do each week when we hand out awards for Chutzpah, or display of the week, and Mensch of the week. Don't worry, we're going to give you time while we talk about. I'm going to get this.
He's got his scary eyes.
Well, I would give. I think it could be either a Chutzpah or Mensch to you, Yonit, because of your amazing interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu this week, which we haven't found time to talk about, where you managed to get him to say that he had been talking to one of the witnesses in his own trial, which he was not meant to have admitted.
True.
And here's my interesting question before we start handing out awards, which is, he is such a practiced communicator, Bibi Netanyahu, almost none more in the world. Is it conceivable that he literally got sort of tangled and trapped into saying something, which is amazing, kudos to you, if so? Or is there some amazingly Machiavellian game where somehow it was good for him to blurt that out? I tend towards the former, but you tell me.
I will answer the question. I'm just trying to figure out if this is you giving me the Mensch award or him the Chutzpah award. What is going on?
You know,
I don't mind.
I'm prepared to do a double here, because either way, you know, it's just such a signature moment.
He expected, look, it was his first interview in the pre-election blitz, right? That he hates the mainstream media. He always singles it out. But then a month before the election, he has to do his whole going through the different networks. Remember, Jeff, you're going
to be working at
12,
Channel 59 soon. You're going to be
before the sports
347 or something on the dial.
That might well happen. So it's funny because it's true, like Homer Simpson likes to say. So I think what I was trying to do, and what I have a good friend who used to work for another prime minister who once told me that the important thing to do is to try and throw the interviewee a little off balance.
I'm sorry, wait, there have been other prime ministers?
Wait, when you were a young boy,
you have to do a special history
young boy,
podcast
Jeff, there were some other
no.
prime ministers.
Can I just tell you too for one thing? Sorry,
ancient history.
I wrote a profile. Please. Sorry, I have to tell you this because I just saw this. I wrote a profile of Jibril Rajoub in 1997. Says how old I am. Possible future head of the Palestinian Authority now, then the security director of the West Bank. And I didn't realize, it was in the New York Times Magazine. I didn't realize as I was reading it because I was looking at what I had said about Jibril Rajoub. And I interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu. There's like quotes from Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was like 1997. It's like, you guys, I don't know.
Well, we did have a few in between.
Yeah, I know, but it felt like,
okay, I'm just saying.
It feels like, all right already, all right. I got it.
Now, you can make history programs. I've done one. You can make a history program for the BBC about 25th anniversary of events in Israel, and he was still.
And by the way, the quotes sound exactly like what he would say today.
Yeah,
by the way,
he's the fixed point in our universe. I didn't mean
to interrupt the flow of your very seriousness here.
No, but you're
go on. So you were talking about wrong-footing interviewees.
Wrong-footing interviewees.
As it happens,
Why was I thinking of that? I don't think he planned to say that thing about talking to Arnon Milch and the Hollywood mogul.
So listen, you can get either Chutzpah or Mensch, I think, for that scoop of the week. I think you would do, whichever award you like. The Chutzpah award I was tempted to give. I'm torn between two Washington candidates because I think Mitch McConnell is a real candidate for Chutzpah for simultaneously trying to have his cake and eat it. And this is Boris Johnson's political ideology in a nutshell, to the point where it's known as cakeism, where you simultaneously say, I want to acquit Donald Trump and appeal to all the people in my Republican Party who think I should be off the former president's back, and I want to condemn him and get kudos and applause from Wall Street backers of the Republican Party and establishment media, etc. And that's what Mitch McConnell tried to do, to simultaneously be both on both sides of the Donald Trump issue. And I think he gets a chutzpah prize for that, unless he's beaten to it by Donald Trump himself, who in his little response to Mitch McConnell said, all these wins, all these Senate gains were because of me, and the Senate losses in Georgia, they were because of Mitch McConnell. That idea of thinking whenever we do well, that's me. Whenever we do badly, it's someone else. That also deserves a Chutzpah award. Do you have any other nominees, Jeff, for Chutzpah award?
Wait, I don't remember. Did Yonit get the award for Mensch? Or
well, she's a nominee. Both. She's a strong nominee. Yeah,
I'm taking the Mensch.
I don't understand the rule. I mean, I don't understand the rules of this game. When you could just nominate.
Normally, you've got to have a hero and a villain.
No. I mean, that you can nominate yourselves seems kind of, I don't know, like insider trading.
I'm still stuck on the cakeism.
No. I would say, and I've just been following this a little bit in the news out of Israel today, that Bibi would qualify for finally getting his phone call with Joe Biden, who is obviously overwhelmingly popular with the mass of American Jews, and obviously the new president, and sort of getting that gain, and then going on and waxing, sort of beautifully about Rush Limbaugh and what a great friend and he is, and sort of. It's a little bit of a thumb in the eye to the Biden people who had just given him what he wanted to then go out and laud excessively a person who is besides the fact that unpopular with, let's say 70 to 80% of American Jewry, to go out and kind of and talk about this wonderful man who is was the sworn enemy of Joe Biden and the Democratic foreign policy establishment, among other things. It seemed like classic old school Netanyahu kind of move. And I remember very well, as do you two, I imagine, the time Biden was in Israel as vice president, and a settlement announcement. While it's just like there's either an impulse or a predisposition or just the way things work to kind of just stick your thumb in the eye unnecessarily. So I don't know if that counts as a chutzpah or whatever, but I was just noting that And by the way, you could be a mensch and like write a nice note to Rush Limbaugh's family and say he was always a friend to me or something like that. But just going out of your way and I don't know, sticking it.
Yeah, no, I think it counts. I think it's got the chutzpah quality as well of my cakeism, because he's trying to have it both ways by, cozying up to Biden and praising his adversary. So I think that definitely wins.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because it's my first time playing, so I didn't want to.
No, you've made a good debut. You've got
You're
potential.
better than this than we are. We don't want to admit.
You've got good potential. Now, I've got a serious mensch. So if you've got something less serious, we should have that first, because I don't want to bring things down with my mensch candidate.
So I will give. I'm giving MADA the Mensch Award, the Magen David Adom, which is the Israeli Medical Emergency Service, who this week decided to vaccinate as many people as possible and went to the beach to vaccinate young Israelis who didn't want to, which I think is very cool. So I'm giving them the Mensch Award.
They deserve it. And my one is, and sometimes this has become our informal sort of obituary spot, which shouldn't become a habit, but this week saw the passing of Otto Dov Kulka, who is and was an extraordinary man because he was a very distinguished historian of the Holocaust, admired for work in a really exceptional area, which is he analysed polling data of the German nation during the years of the Holocaust and found that far from being blissfully unaware and indifferent, they knew a lot about what was going on and approved it. And he did that by analysing polling data. He was a serious scholar of the Holocaust and only revealed to colleagues and students very, very late that he was himself a survivor of the Holocaust and had been, as a 10-year-old, in the Czech family camp, a very bizarre part of the Auschwitz-Storia camp where Czech families were kept intact just in case the Red Cross should come by and inspect a kind of Potemkin concentration camp within Auschwitz. Otto Dov Kulka kept that secret for most of his life and then wrote the most extraordinary memoir, Landscape of the Metropolis of Death. It's a brilliant memoir, and he was an extraordinary man. So he would be my candidate for Mensch of the Week. And I think we've done all the awards we can possibly do. And everyone should have prizes. I think we've and Jeff, you've made a fantastic start as our rookie for this
Thank
week.
you.
I think in terms of the Mensch and chutzpah distribution, you can definitely come back.
Do you two also give out the Israel Prize? Is that?
No, but we do the Oscars. Do you need any help with that?
That's an interesting one. Well, I knew there was Jewish involvement somehow. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's nice. Nice of you to have me.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I was going to say you're one of the smartest people I know, but forget that. You're great fun. And if anyone, after listening to this, does not believe you're great fun, I would say go listen to Jeff's commencement speech, John Hopkins. I would recommend that.
Oh.
Yellow is your color, my friend.
That was quite a robe that they got me in there at that time.
That was quite a robe.
Yeah. I made mostly jokes. It was mostly jokes. A little bit like dire warnings about democracy, but mostly jokes. I remember that.
That could be the slogan for this podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah. Democracy is dying plus jokes.
That's right. Democracy dies in darkness with a snicker.
Yeah.
That would be good. Thank you, Jeff Goldberg, very much for coming on Unholy.
Really appreciate it. And we were really honored. We spell it differently, but we were totally honored that you came up.
Yeah, you are our very first guest.
Wow.
Our favoured guest. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do give us a review. We love 5-star reviews. We also love you to recommend us to your friends, your family, your grandparents, your grandchildren, anybody. You don't ring, you don't write, but do review. And who else do we need to thank, Yonit?
I'm just shocked at how I got the British guy to do the hard sell. We have an American, we have an Israeli, and the British guy did the hard sell.
And
I'm
it's
shocked.
pain. You can hear the pain for me.
And we were thanking Lior Friedman and Rom Atik and Yair Bashan and Irad Eshel. And thank you for listening. And Jeff, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you.
We shall meet next week, Jonathan.
See you then.